All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to our virtual open house presentation for the UTA Long-Range Transit Plan. My name is Megan Waters. I'm the Community Engagement Director at UTA. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Alex to introduce himself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining to learn about the UTA Long-Range Transit Plan. It's something we're pretty excited about. We'll have a presentation and there's an opportunity to ask questions in the chat or through the Q&A feature. And I'll turn it over to Thomas Whitman of the consulting firm Nelson Nygaard, who is engaged with us in this exciting effort. So thanks for being here. And I'll turn it over to Thomas. Thanks.
Hi, good evening. It's I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you're here that that you'll have the opportunity to hear some of the things that we have as a part of the long-range transit plan. I want to start off by saying, what are we going to be talking about today? It's talk a little bit about what is a long-range transit plan, what are some of the things that we'll be looking at as part of this, what are some of the things that inform the transit plan, and then also talk about what are some of the things that you can do to help us make this a plan that truly reflects community values, and then ultimately talk about, where do we see, the outcomes of this be, what are the outcomes for this? Ultimately, if we want to start out, it's why are we doing a long-range transit plan? The biggest thing is that the region is growing, that we're anticipating that another 1 million+ people are going to be added to the population within the Wasatch Front. And with that comes both positives and negatives. There's economic growth and opportunity, yet at the same time, congestion is going to get worse. And with that, the air quality that is already an issue could get worse as well. So, what do we do about this, and why do we need this? If we think back 30 years ago, and this is there's a picture right here on the screen of South Jordan, Draper, and Sandy, and what it looked like 30 years ago, and then side by side with that, what it looks like today. There was no tracks 30 years ago. There was no front runner 30 years ago, but the time was taken to develop a series of investment strategies so that the growth from a roadway perspective as well as a transit perspective could work hand in hand with some of the investments that are there. The major transit investments, just like roadway investments, take time to develop, fund, and implement. And these types of investments are necessary as the region contemplates continual growth, that will, and the transit investments can help address the growth where it's happening, as well as mitigate some of those environmental impacts that we know are out there as well, and support the economic development of a growing and dynamic region. So how do we accomplish this? We're looking at this as a long-range transit plan that is a vision that shows within the next 30 years how we're going to understand and respond to the future needs of the communities that we're serving. This vision is, to help us understand where public transportation should be, how do we provide mobility to the region, and look at this not within a fiscally constrained environment, but consider all ideas and then use a prioritization process to help us understand what's most important of every single one of these ideas. There's 4 different goals that have been laid out for the long-range transit plan. And the first one is to strengthen partnerships with the communities we serve. The UTA works together with municipalities, with cities, with regional planning organizations, and together we'll help develop this plan to enhance mobility. We'll also be looking at assessing the long-term transit needs in talking with municipalities, hearing from you, as well as taking an intense data, a look at the data that will help inform that. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the potential data that we'll be looking at for this. And with that, we'll be developing a system-wide vision for the future. This will incorporate what we've heard, what the data says, and the travel patterns will be, what some of the needs are. And we will also look at establishing strategies for implementation that reflect what is the funding strategy? What is the partnerships that we'll need to make this happen? And what is the order of implementation that we should be using, and looking at as part of this process? I want to make sure that we understand that this is, the long-range transit plan does not focus on short-term changes to your route or your bus stop or your train station, but instead looks at what is the future network? What should that look like? And how can we use that network to help us grow and maintain our livable communities and maintain the quality of life that attracted folks to live in the Wasatch Front in the first place? The UTA's planning process, there's 4 different phases associated with this. It's strategic planning, which encompasses the long-range transit plan, which is the long-range vision, the 30-year vision for, what types of investments do we make? And this then fits in with, this is done in coordination with regional partner transportation plans, RTPs, and it builds upon what metropolitan planning organizations have already put into their plans. But the long-range transit plan also goes beyond what's in the regional transportation plans by looking at all services, all capital investments, and ties it together in a comprehensive vision for public transit over the next 30 years. The 5-year service plan effort is something that looks at what service changes, non-major capital service changes will happen in the next 5 years, and then ultimately that feeds into the annual operations planning, which starts planning when does that service become a reality, and it offers an opportunity for changes to be made on what specific service that hits the street might look like. And then ultimately the implementation phase talks about is when the rubber hits the road and service actually gets changed out there. So this sets up that the long-range transit plan is not the elements that you see in there, the major capital investments that are as a part of that, or even some of the service investments that we see as a part of that. It's not going to happen tomorrow. That it's not going to. It's part of a multi-year process that looks at what is the vision, and then we work toward that vision through a series of established steps where there's opportunities for you to provide continual feedback to make sure that these investments reflect the region's needs. This process has started in 2021, and it started with listening tours, talking with municipalities and key stakeholders to help understand what are some of the needs as a part of this process. This open house is a part of this listening. We want to hear from you in terms of what some of those needs you see within the region, what some of those key connections, what some of the new corridors we want to take a look at. We're going to look at finalizing our needs assessment later this winter and develop a vision for what transit could be within the region and begin prioritizing that over the spring and summer with an ultimate end date of fall of 2023 of a long-range transit plan being available for you to view, for you to comment on, and for us to finalize after we've heard feedback on that from you. I want to transition and talk a little bit about UTA and then also what some of the things are that we're looking at as a part of this process. First of all, it's really cool to see how UTA's ridership has overcome some of the crises over the past several years. And UTA's ridership growth is it exceeds the national average of what we're seeing. That fixed route service and regular bus service and light rail service are really growing. They're almost reached their pre-pandemic levels. Commuter-based services, express bus has been a little bit slower to recover, as has front runner. And this is where we're seeing some of the manifestation of working from home, some days of the week. So we're not seeing as high of a ridership growth. But overall, it doesn't matter which line of business it is. We're seeing, that the growth, the service and riders are coming back, and it's extraordinarily gratifying to see, because this is going to be the baseline that we're going to be using to help us understand where service is right now and what are the needs within the future as well. We also, as a part of this process, looked at other areas that have built transformative long-range transit plans that help shape a region. And the peers that we looked at, Austin, Denver, Seattle, Vancouver, BC, are all places that are growing tremendously, have changes, significant changes in housing costs and how people get around and how that changes transportation in an area. And each one of these cities has developed a transformative plan that helps shape where transit investments are going to go in the future. So we're looking, we looked at these to help us understand what are some of the key takeaways, what are some of the key successes out of it. And the data-driven process is one of these, but also a messaging on like, how do we define success? For instance, Austin and Seattle both look at accessibility and how many people have access to transit, or how many people have access to jobs as a metric for the future, and say, here's our goal, and here's the steps that we're taking in order to meet that goal. UTA's strategic plan has an accessibility goal. So looking at that as a best practice of like how these incremental steps that the long-range transit plan is going to be looking at can help show here's how we're making progress toward reaching that goal up there. Vancouver, BC, is doing something similar where they said, we have 50 miles of BR bus rapid transit or rail improvements that we want to see, and over the next 30 years, we're going to measure how much progress we're meeting toward that goal, to have transparency in terms of the plan itself and how we're making progress on that plan to ensure that the dollars that are being spent are actually going toward what we said we would do as a part of this plan. So one of the other things I want to touch upon is, like, from a needs assessment, it's like, what are some of the things we're going to be looking at? And we're going to be looking at how well UTA serves the region today in terms of demographics. Certain folks are more likely to use transit than others. And whether you're low income, don't have access to a vehicle, those are ways that we know will increase the probability that you're going to use service. So we want to take a look at where some of these areas are where people are more likely to use transit. And an example of this is Salt Lake County on the right-hand side. And then try to assess how well does UTA serve these areas right now? Is there a discrepancy between where the higher need populations are and where the service is right now? We'll also be looking at what does the ridership patterns look like? What is the ridership? The most recent ridership numbers in 2022. We want to take a look at how that's changed over the past 3 years to help us understand what are some of the opportunities for growth, and where's growth happening right now, and how does that tie in with some of the higher need areas that we see as a part of this analysis. We'll also want to take a look at where are jobs and where do people live, and that not just today, but also in the future. And then also look at where are people traveling to and from, and for regional projections for the future, as well as today's travel markets using things like cell phone data, which help us understand specifically where people are going from point A to point B, when they're traveling, and who's doing the traveling, again, to help us understand how well does UTA's service match up with these travel pattern needs. An example is in Weber County as well as Davis County of where we see the greatest population growth happening, and there's some correlation between where that population growth is happening and where UTA has already invested in higher capacity transit services. But then there's also some areas that aren't as necessarily well served by UTA, and this is really what we mean by looking at what are some of the gaps in the service. And none of this suggests that there must be a solution to this, but this is all tools that help us understand, where people live, work, and play, and how UTA can serve that potential market. The long-range transit plan will also consider the needs of those who rely on transit the most. So specifically, we'll be taking a look at where are low-income populations and how well are they served, and are there any areas that have higher percentages of low-income neighborhoods or the low-income folks living there that don't necessarily have access to UTA service right now. An example of this is in Utah County right here of some of the things that we will be looking at as a part of this process. We'll also be looking at, I mentioned earlier about accessibility, that some of our peer agencies have taken a look at. We'll be measuring how many people have access to jobs, how many people have access to high quality service, either rail service or bus rapid transit service or UVX services, or right now. And if the network didn't change, how many people are anticipated to have access in 2050? And this is really, we see what the anticipated growth is right now, but with additional investments, how many more people and how many more jobs can we add to this is going to be one of the things that we're going to be looking at to help measure the potential success of any future service investments. So with that, where do we go from here? We want to listen. We want to take a look at what the existing potential investment strategies are that other plans have already started to develop. And then as a part of this, we'll develop an evaluation process that then takes a look at, how do we begin prioritizing these investment strategies, and then ultimately develop an implementation plan that says, here's our highest priority investment strategies. Here's what we'll look at and can look at, implementing, and what it will take to implement in the first 10 years, the next 10 years, and the 10 years thereafter, and ultimately create an implementation plan over the next 30 years that says, here's what UTA can deliver. Here's how UTA can help address the mobility challenges and enhance the continued vitality of the Wasatch Front area. So how can you become involved in this? We're looking for community input on how and where long-term strategic service and capital projects should go. We have a project website. It's riderdta.com/LRTP that shows us what some of the information is for the project. This presentation will be on there shortly after this, after today. There's a survey on there. There's a link on the screen right now that you can take a look at and write down or take a screenshot of right now. Or you could go to rideuta.com/LRTP, and there's a button that says take the survey, and you can help us understand what some of your needs are there as well. Or you can email feedback to lrtp@rideuta.com. And at the end of this presentation, we'll obviously also have the opportunity through the chat function to have for you to have questions, and we'll do our best to answer those as well. Ultimately, this plan is we're looking at having it be completed in the fall of 2023. And it's, again, a way for us to develop a community-based plan that addresses today's and the anticipated future travel markets for the region, and prioritizes, what is most important for UTA to meet the needs, the traveling needs of the region, of the municipalities, of the cities, and of the towns, that are within the service area, so that we can develop a comprehensive vision for what service should be today and how to improve it in the future. And this is something that should be transparent for you, the public, so that you can see, how did we get these investment strategies? How did we prioritize these investment strategies? And how you, the public, were involved in identifying them as well as prioritizing them as well. And ultimately, this long-range vision will lead to service improvements within the 5-year service plan process, which you've heard about, or most likely heard about, that ultimately leads to changes on the street. So this is the first step from a strategic perspective of laying the groundwork for future year improvements. That concludes the formal presentation for this, and I'd like to open things up to question and answer. So thank you for listening.
There are a couple ways that you can submit questions to us for discussion. There's the Q&A feature, the question and answer feature, where you can type a question there. You're also welcome to use the chat box, and we would welcome any questions that you all have. I did receive a couple of questions through the registration form. Alex, should we cover those?
Yes, well, it looks like we've got one through the chat right now.
Oh,
So we
perfect.
could-
All right, so we have a question that reads, it seems like the west of I-15 has land available for development. Is there a comprehensive study for UTA corridor preservation similar to the UDOT corridor preservation right-of-way?
So I can talk to that a little bit. I can say that through this process, we're going to look at really every place that's within our service area and every place that we might consider service. So we will look at transit needs in that area. We have also partner with Salt Lake County, all the municipalities in that area. And there have been a number of studies looking at potential for future development. And part of what this plan will build off of is those existing plans. Corridor preservation is one of the tools that we're looking at. Like I said, we're still have the needs assessment underway, so we don't have a proposal to comment on yet. But I think next time we come out for the second round of public engagement, we should have some more defined priorities. At this point, it's sort of more informational. Hope that helps to answer that specific question.
Thanks, Alex. And please remember, if you don't feel like you got an adequate answer, or you have a question that might be a little bit outside the scope of the long-range transit plan and our presentation this evening, feel free to email us at this project email. So I see another question, a couple more questions in the chat and the Q&A. So would UTA consider staggering tracks lines so that there are shorter headways where the lines overlap?
So I can say that that's probably a little bit outside of the scope of what we're looking at with this. We are just finishing up a future of light rail study, which will soon have information online at rideuta.com and a full report. It's looked at a number of different ways to add additional tracks lines or reconfigure tracks lines so that we might be able to improve headways in the future.
Great. We have another question about whether will the UTA on-demand program be included in the LRTP?
Yes, that's a great question, and one of the reasons why we saw a need for the long-range transit plan is, and some of you may be familiar that we work with partner agencies, and they develop long-range regional transportation plans that include large infrastructure projects, and their focus has generally been on things that require large capital investments, rail extensions or new rail lines, or frequent bus service that have improvement in the corridor. But the long-range transit plan from UTA will really look at assess needs and look at a variety of solutions from local bus, UTA on demand, and so forth.
Great. So another question about the LRTP listening sessions. What priorities were identified by municipalities in the initial listening sessions? Alex, can you take a stab at that one?
Yeah, it's fairly dense and complex. We heard, one of the things that is a challenge as we work through this process is we have a approximately 1,500 square mile service area, and so there is a huge amount of different needs, and so we have some folks who are happy with what they have, some folks that see that they're going to have strong economic development within their communities or densification. So east-west connections is a big thing that comes up every place along in our region. So we'll have a more defined report that shows that. We've got preliminary information, and part of the challenge is that there's so many different needs throughout our region, but we are able to sort of parse out by region that certain areas that are are looking to be are fairly well built out as residential areas, some areas that are growing. And so we're looking to respond to that variety of needs.
Perfect. We have another question about how UTA is working with UDOT. So the question is, how is UTA working with UDOT to create more balance or alternatives to auto-centric projects like the I-15 expansion?
Well,
go
go ahead.
I was just going to say, you want to speak a little bit about how UDOT's a partner on planning studies like this?
Yes. Part of what makes transportation planning work in Utah is coordination among the agencies. So UTA and then UDOT, and then we also work with the metropolitan planning organizations. That would be the Mountain Land Association of Governments in Utah County, and then the Wasatch Front Regional Council, which covers Weber, Davis, and Box Elder in our service area. And so we look at a number of options. We certainly have a strong recognition, as have our partners at UDOT, that congestion cannot be built. You can't build your way out of congestion by making roads bigger and bigger forever. And UDOT is certainly supportive in the idea of we need to think about moving people. It's not just about moving cars. It's a strong partnership. And we also, like I said, work with our MPO partners and the cities all throughout the region. And a big piece that'll also add to that is the land use. And so we need to really think about where development happens and how transit can support that. So the short answer is yes. That was the long answer.
Thanks, Alex. That's a great segue, talking about UDOT partnerships, into this next question, which asks, what is the process for developing the front runner further north into Box Elder County looking like in the next 30 years?
So there was a study, a transit feasibility study for Box Elder County completed in 2022, I want to say, so fairly recently, that looked at a number of different options. At this point, the regional transportation plans identify corridor preservation, which Sean mentioned earlier. So making sure that we have the space to extend rail further north as densification occurs. Part of that might be looking at how things might change over time. Like I said, that's something we'll be looking at in this plan. Another thing I do want to point out about this plan, which I believe Thomas probably spoke to a little bit, was that this isn't the only time we're going to be doing this plan, right? We will continually update this. So we plan to have the initial plan put together late this year, and then we'll update it every 4 years. So if things change in Box Elder County significantly, or we see strong changes, we have the flexibility to update this plan over time.
Thanks, Alex. People have lots of questions. This is great. So I'm going to read, kind of paraphrase maybe some of the next ones. We've got some lengthy questions, but I'll do my best. So to make it answerable for Alex. So one of our participants is asking about the Rio Grande plan, and will you talk about kind of how that plan might be incorporated or considered as part of the LRTP process? So they ask what steps UTA has taken to evaluate this plan. Are there aspects of the plan we view as significant to enhancing levels of service? Are there aspects of the plan that UTA currently views as relevant to long-range planning? Do you want to take any considerations on that, Alex?
Sure. And I guess for some context, for if anyone is on that is not familiar with the plan, this was a sort of high-level proposal put together with a conceptual idea of relocating some of the track that operates through downtown and heads over to where Salt Lake Central is at 600 West, and move the track, I should say, back to where it once was, adjacent to the Rio Grande Station at 500 West. And I can say that it's a very ambitious plan, and it's an exciting idea. We are working with others, and it sort of requires other people to participate. We certainly will support whatever direction Salt Lake City wants to go with that, and other regional partners. There's a lot of considerations between the fact that there's significant amount of freight line that runs near where we operate, near Salt Lake Central. And there's the considerations of land use with Salt Lake City. But my understanding is that Salt Lake City is looking into a next step of feasibility. So I guess the short answer to that, or in summary, is that it's an exciting idea if it can happen. There's some feasibility ideas that still need to be considered. It would certainly affect our long-range plans. It is being considered through UTA's Front Runner Forward effort in partnership with UDOT. And so at this point, I think it's too early in the development to say where it'll go, but we're looking to see what happens with that. So
Great. So we have another question about whether you can speak to the plans for the 201 corridor as they may relate to the land use plans for the Inland Port Authority. And if we need to take that offline, we can too.
Yeah, if there's different specific questions that are more in the short range, we can perhaps get a different or more refined answer from some of the folks who work in our short range planning. It is certainly a consideration as we look out beyond the 5-year horizon to 10, 20, 30 years. Development along the west side and in the inland port will certainly be a major consideration as we do analysis and look at what future transit needs may be. One consideration and challenge that always exists with large industrial sites is they tend to facilitate movement of heavy vehicles and are not ideal for movement of people. So we certainly hope and work to look to work with Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County and other partners to create land use that is both supportive of industry development in that area should it come to fruition, and also allow the sort of walkability that would allow folks to get to jobs there on transit easily.
Awesome. So we have a comment and a question about population growth and potentially adding. So if the population growth is accurate, we could potentially add 3 million new trips within a limited area of the valley. Without the option of adding more traffic lanes to arterial roads, it seems like public transportation is the solution. Do either of you want to address kind of how the state legislature is considering transportation funding?
So most of the operational funding for transit right now, at least in our region, comes from local option sales taxes. The state legislature is looking seriously at transit, and you may be aware that they've at least supported capital investments on a number of large transit projects. And so we are going beyond what many states do in terms of considering investment in transit. So the short answer is they are looking at that. There could always be more support, and we, for transit. So go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd like to add with this is, that this plan is, we're not looking initially at saying, here's our budget that we have today that the legislature has approved, but instead this is a way to help show what the need is in an ideal world. In our vision, how much would it cost to, to address and to serve these, let's call it 3 million new trips within the valley? And this is our way to help use this as an advocacy tool, not for what happens next year, but in the next 30 years, we're going to need X number of millions of dollars in order to begin addressing these needs, and then begin building partnerships to help say, this is how we're going to fund this, and this is how we're going to maintain the mobility within the area. And so this plan is an advocacy tool as well as a vision for what the future should look like.
Thanks, Thomas. That's great. And just yeah, from our perspective, it also provides, as was pointed out, just more information to help policymakers decide if there likely will be a gap between what a vision might encompass in terms of transit and what we could fund through existing or planned future revenues. So this will help inform policymakers. It is ultimately, as a public agency, not our decision to make if the state or local folks want to provide additional funding, but we will provide the option to say this is what you could get, and here's our anticipated cost for that.
So our next question, I kind of want to I want to get at the root of the free fare question in the chat and just ask about how we're considering, if we're considering kind of fare related processes within the LRTP, or if that is outside the scope.
So our primary focus, and Thomas, feel free to add to this, is looking at service needs, looking out 10, 20, 30 years. How the rest of the system operates factors into that. But those are, I guess, the supportive things to how transit may function in the future.
Ultimately, we're looking at the service and capital investments, for the future, as a part of this. The fare piece is an operational, a separate operational issue that is, while can contribute to how much ridership may or may not be there, but it is ultimately outside of the scope of the long-range transit plan to make a call whether to go that direction or not.
Great, thank you for those answers. It looks like we have one more question at this time. Are there any plans for BRT or LRT systems, that's bus rapid transit or light rail transit systems in Saratoga Springs or Eagle Mountain areas? Can you talk about how those areas might be impacted?
Sure, and we will look at options for additional service in that area, as we are looking in all areas of our region. At this point, the Mountainland Association of Governments has identified a need for additional transit, and I believe they have it on their vision list, which means that it is something that is supported as an idea, but at this point not funded. A challenge, as I mentioned before, is the land use, and that we certainly want to look at and think about is once again, as areas start to fill in between Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain and say Lehigh, that makes transit more effective as you have more continuous development, and then if there is more density along a corridor to support development, to support transit, that can be a consideration also. But once again, I guess I always start with the long answer and then recap. Is the short answer is that we are looking at transit options, throughout the entire service area, including Saratoga Springs and Eagle Mountain.
Excellent. So moving a little bit to the questions that we received during registration, I just want to kind of ask you all, someone had asked about the status of the Davis SLC Community Connector, and not to get into the details of the project, but to talk about how those ongoing projects might be incorporated into this LRTP planning process. Do you want to kind of talk about what people might expect to see if they have a project that is kind of known in their community? What does this LRTP mean for them in those projects too?
So that one's the Davis Salt Lake City connector is fairly far along in the planning process, and has been identified as a project by the Wasatch Front Regional Council, and supported by a number of communities along the alignment. These projects that already exist will serve as an input along with other inputs as we do an analysis of needs in our system. Yes, and I guess that's so we'll consider that project and all other projects that exist in one of the other regional plans as we work through this.
Great. The other question, I think, actually, I don't think there was. If you didn't get your question answered through registration and you would like to talk more about them, please shoot us an email at the project email at lrtp@rideuta.com. I'm going to give people just a minute more to think if they have a question they'd like to ask before we end our meeting this evening.
We did get a couple of extra questions in the chat.
Yeah. And there was one other question I think was pre-submitted that was asking about additional service to Tooele, and
That's
you
right.
know, similar to Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs. We are looking at that area. I will say also for Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, there have been some local studies that we partnered on to look at transit needs. There was also a transit study for connecting Tooele to Salt Lake City and other points that was conducted in 2021. I might get those years plus or minus a year, but recently, and that will all be inputs as we work on this plan. So
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. And thanks for pointing out these other questions. They all blended together. So the next question that I see is, what's the best way to support transit funding to speed up the goals of the LRTP and 5-year plan?
Well, I guess that's a complicated question. I would say if you're interested in you know, looking at different transportation options, get involved. We work heavily with like I said, our regional partners, but also local elected officials, and things end up in community plans because they're supported by community elected officials, and those folks should be representing you. And so if there's something you'd like to see happen, I would say you should get involved and advocate for those things that you believe in. I don't know if that answers very specifically, but a big thing is getting involved and making your voice heard.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Alex. And our other question here is, you mentioned that UTA and UDOT are working together to address congestion. Is there a goal to have a percentage of the population riding transit within the next 30 years?
So that goes, so we'll be defining some goals for the long range transit plan and some benchmarks, which I think that Thomas mentioned during the presentation. We haven't fully fleshed those out yet. The UTA Board of Trustees have recently developed a strategic plan looking out to 2030 that encompasses a number of things, including increasing ridership, increasing access to transit, and those sort of things. And we certainly expect that this plan will intersect and reinforce the goals of our Board of Trustees. So, so yes, we will be looking at goals for improving access, providing an alternative to single occupancy vehicle travel. And, that all helps with congestion reduction. And thank you, Megan, put a link to the Board of Trustees strategic plan for anyone who may be interested in more detail on that.
So we have another question about whether you can comment about investing on creating options for large trips generators such as colleges and universities. For instance, a BYU or UVU satellite campus in southern Utah County will reverse trips southbound.
So there's a lot to say about that, but the short version is a shorter version, I guess, is that we are looking at a big part of the analysis that we're looking at is trip generators throughout the region. And to your point on the specifics of say BYU and UVU, we have already seen that, and through things like UVX and through things like the fact that unlike many cities where a commuter rail system is focused on bringing people from a suburb into one central downtown business district, we have a polycentric development style, and so we have trips that go from Lehigh to Provo, or from Sandy to Salt Lake City, or Sandy to Ogden. So we have trips going multiple different directions, and so that analysis we are working on and thinking about, not just for where it's happening today, but where it might in the future. Thomas, you had unmuted for a minute. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, it's we have an extensive travel demand analysis that looks at what is the current travel patterns, where are people going to and from right now, and we can compare that to are the travel patterns, how well do they match up with some of UTA's existing services, and also look at the future to where some of these future land uses are, where there's some of these future growth areas are, and again see how it matches up with the existing service network, and try to understand how big is the need, and what are the best technologies and what are the best investment strategies to address those needs. So the plan will specifically be looking at that. And I certainly appreciate you bringing up yet another one of these opportunities, which is satellite campuses for the universities.
So our next question is about the geographic scope of the LRTP. Do connections to areas of the state beyond the Wasatch Front and back fit into the LRTP? If so, can you discuss areas of current focus and outreach or study being done in these areas?
So the primary focus of this long-range plan is within what could be defined as the taxing district of communities that have agreed to be a part of the UTA service area. And so that's going to be the primary focus. I will say that travel throughout the state is something that is considered, and we consider now. We have folks that work to connect us from the edge of our system, say in Brigham City to Cache County, and to point south, obviously connecting to destinations like Moab and other tourist destinations, as well as just travel to St. George and other parts of the state. So it looks like from within the scope of where we're looking at, it will probably be facilitating connections to those other systems, because like, for example, in the case of Cache County, they have a transit system that they operate already. Park City, as another example, has a transit system, High Valley and Park City Transit. And so the focus would really be, how can we think about improving as they change over time? How can we better facilitate transition from our system to one of our partner transit agencies in the state?
Thank you. Really good questions, everyone. We really appreciate it. Last call for any last questions from our participants this evening.
Which, and I'll also add, as we pointed out earlier, there is, and Thomas mentioned, and Megan as well, that there are opportunities either through our project website or to take the LRTP survey, and via the email address that you can write in for questions about the process and what we're working on. And as I mentioned and Thomas described earlier, we will be coming out to the public again once we have more defined scenarios for folks to comment on. So there'll be time throughout this process.
Thanks for that reminder, Alex. Thomas pulled up the important links we have again. So if you forgot, this meeting is being recorded. So if you missed any of the content and want to go back and check it out again, that will be available on our website as well. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening and your interest in the long-range transit plan. We're excited to continue engaging with you all throughout this process and to develop a really positive plan for our region. Any last comments, Thomas or Alex, before we close the meeting?
I just want to thank everyone for participating. We got a pretty good group of folks on and some really great questions. So yeah, we're looking forward to working with the community as we develop this plan.
I'd like to also thank everyone for participating today, and I look forward to continued participation, later on in the process as we develop a series of investment strategies, and we'll again be looking to you to help us understand what are some of the priorities, how would you like to see things prioritized, and then provide feedback on where we ultimately end up from an investment strategy perspective. We want this plan to reflect community values, and your input is essential in making that happen. So thank you so much for this.
With that, I will close the meeting. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time tonight. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.